One of the things that I've talked a lot about if over the last 7 years as a pastor here, and so if you're a regular parishioner, if you're from here, apologies that you'll have to hear some of this again, but hopefully this, some of this is, again, for the visitors and so forth. I talk a lot about football because my life is kind of divided into two halves. Seminary and getting ready for the priesthood is kind of the second half of my life, and the first half, everything before that, was football. Before my grandfather, I've shared before, my grandfather coached high school football in Kentucky for 60 years, and that obviously was begun before I was born. And my dad coached football for about 20 years at Roncalli High School, where we all grew up. And so obviously, as soon as I can remember anything, most of what I remember is football. Dad babysitting us by taking us to practice and then leaving us unsupervised for 3 hours to, run around in the weight room or hit each other with tackling dummies or whatever it was. And, so I loved it. I loved football, and whether it was in Kentucky or in Indiana, going to Dad's games, Friday nights, where it was in the fall, it was chilly, and then it was getting into the car and wearing the jersey, and then driving to the game, and as a little kid, and even from a distance you could see the lights, and then just my heart would start racing, and I'd get excited, and I loved everything. I loved the band and the candy and the popcorn and everything, and the cheering and the celebrating the wins in the locker room afterwards and all of that kind of stuff. It was just, I loved it, right? And then probably in the third grade, I think it was, when my mom decided it was safe enough to let me on the field, I became a water boy for Roncalli. And so now I'm on the field with all of my heroes, out in the huddle, learning some new words, all of those kinds of things. But again, loved it, and it was just awesome. And I cried as hard as I've ever cried when I was in third grade, and we won the state championship, mostly due to my water boy talent. And then the next year, I cried as hard as I ever cried when we lost the state championship. I'm crying in the locker room of the Hoosier Dome as a fourth grader. I remember that. But football, I love it. I still do, although probably more properly in its proper context at this point in my life. But the point is, I loved football, right? It was all that I knew, and I loved it. And so when it came time, and here's the point, when it came time to actually play football and practice football, I didn't mind. I wanted to do it. I wanted to practice. I didn't mind the fact of all of the running, the sweating, the lifting weights, which was basically my life for like 11 years, particularly because I was the worst football player in my grade school. And so I had a lot of work to do. But the running and all this stuff, literally every day of my life for 11 years, right? I didn't mind it at all. I loved it. Right? There were times where, you're running so hard, or you're lifting so hard that you get sick, and it's a grind, It's 6 a.m. on a summer morning. You got to get up and go in and 2 practices a day and all that, and I didn't mind it one bit, ever, in 11 years, right? All the way through high school and even playing at a small Division III college. So here's why I say all of that. I hope this analogy works and helps us, because everybody knows that over the last couple of decades, particularly in our Western culture, the practice of religion has imploded, right? Every statistic and every study, we all know it, right? The numbers have fallen exponentially in terms of the number of people who say, I am a practicing Catholic in the West, right? And even what we've seen in any day, this isn't like one specific, this is all the studies, the current generation of teenagers and college students, every study shows that even within the already enormous implosion of practicing the faith, with that generation, with our current generation that's coming up, the numbers are even exponentially worse than that, right? And here's why I say all of that, right? Maybe I think part of the problem is that we don't love God. If we love God, right, and the church defines religion. Religion is literally a virtue, a habit, right? The church defines it as a habit. Religion Practicing the faith is a habit, right? It is something, though, and when it's being done for no other reason than because you're being made, or it's being forced, or you're feeling like you're being dragged into it, it won't work. I played football with some guys whose parents made them play football. They never made it past freshman year. You've seen the kids that get dragged to piano class but they don't want to play piano. Guess how many of those kids play piano now? 0. Right? Now, I'm not saying that we don't bring our kids to things, and sometimes we need to encourage them, including the faith. When you're young, my mom and dad, when you're living here until you're 18, you're going to church on Sunday, or you're going to pay the rent. Right? So we do have to, but here's what I'm saying. I think what we can do is step back and ask ourselves, this isn't like a depressing, Merry Christmas, talk about everybody leaving the faith, right? Here's why I say all of this. What I want us to think about is, if we love something, then the practice of the virtue of, in this case, the practice of religion is easy. It becomes second nature. It's just something that we do because we love what it is that we're about. And that's not to say that there were obviously a lot of football practices where I was like, man, why? I loved it. I was glad to go. But then there was a part of me that's also like, man, why am I doing this? Oh yeah, because I love football. There's times when you're going to church and you're like, why am I doing it? Oh, because I love God. But if we don't love God, if we don't have that love and that relationship established with God, then we're not going to practice. And so a lot of times I think what you hear in the Catholic world, the blogosphere, or wherever you're at, or Christianity in general, what you hear is a lot of times people saying you need to practice more to the young adults, to the fallen away adults, whoever, wherever they are. Oh, well, you need to practice more. I would say this, and I think this is maybe what I would want us to think about, is, do we love God? Do we love God? I think the way out of it for somebody that's struggling in their faith, who comes tonight maybe, or who comes and celebrates somewhat frequently but is looking to take a deeper, wants to go deeper. And we should all be in that boat. We should all be in the boat of people that want to go deeper. Right? If we come whatever our practice of our faith is, we should all want to grow deeper. And the way to grow deeper is, I think, to step back and say, how do I fall more deeply in love with God so that the practice of the religion and honoring this God and the way that this God has asked me to do that becomes easy, becomes habit, becomes routine. And so I would put forward 2 ways to do this besides saying, go just practice the faith. I would put 2 ways to fall in love with God, or to fall more deeply in love with God. One of those is adoration. If you're looking to fall more deeply in love with God, wherever you're at in your faith, I would ask us to think about and hear the saints calling us to adoration, prayer. Our church is open 7 days a week for anybody to stop in and pray, to adore Christ in the tabernacle. We have a day a week where we actually have Jesus exposed on the altar, in that way to have adoration. But prayer in general, prayer is the time to step aside. Some people might find a mass intimidating. They might have been away for a while, or whatever it is. They might find all of this, I'm not sure what to do, and I'm not sure how to fall more deeply in love with God through this. Usually what has to happen first before the practice means something is that you have to love the thing that you're doing, right? Okay. I came across a great quote, so this prayer is a conversation with God, spending time with God, being away with God in silence. And on my retreat last week, I came across this amazing quote, because I think so many people try prayer for minutes, and it doesn't go well. They don't get to know God, they don't fall more deeply in love with God in a couple minutes. And this is, I think, a great quote from a book on prayer. There is always a danger in human nature of watching ourselves, and in prayer, it's worse than anywhere else. Watching myself at prayer is not prayer. And being too concerned about where we are is a good way to hinder development. When a person is really fervent in his love for God and totally intent on pleasing him, he cannot stop to bother about his own progress, as though it were some kind of game to acquire points. I think a lot of people try to pray, they try to get to know this God, they try to fall more deeply in love with this God, right, through prayer, but they're worried about, am I doing it right? Am I saying the right things? And all those kinds of things. And we try to watch ourselves. Prayer is adoring God, spending time with God in conversation with God, or just sitting with God, right? We sing tonight, "Come, let us adore him," 7 days a week. Come, let us adore him 7 days a week. That is the way to get to know this God. And then the final thing that I would put forward for us tonight is another way to get to know this God who has come to us in an approachable way tonight, in a way that we can understand, a way that we can grasp, a way that we feel safe as a child, who comes to us to try to break down these barriers of fear that we have. Another great way to get to know this God and to fall deeply in love with him is to see him and honor him and reverence him and get to know him in the poor. What we see in the Christmas story is that God loves the poor. He loves all of us, but he has this special place in his heart for the poor. He comes in a stable. Some people say it was a cave, right? Born with the animals, showing, I am not afraid of the poor. In fact, I prefer it. The first people to hear the first Gloria, choirs of angels exploding in heaven. The kings and queens? No, it is the shepherds. The lowliest, the most poor, the most forgotten, the most despised people in the community. That's who hears the first Gloria and the best Gloria. God is showing us, we hear in Matthew 25, the only conditions for the people who come into heaven, who God welcomes into heaven, are the people who serve the poor, who care for the poor, who feed them, who clothe them. And if you work with the poor, you will get to know God. It will draw you closer to God. Right? And so I want us to think a lot of times the way that we look at the poor is the same way that we look at God. A lot of times we fear the poor. Right? We fear, what are they going to take from me? What are they going to ask me for? What are they going to want from me? And those are the same things we say about God. What is God going to want from me? What is God going to take from me? What is he going to require of me? But a crazy thing happens when we start talking with the poor, and it's not just about giving them stuff, it's about getting to know them. Getting to know the God that is hidden in them. The God that is hidden in a stable, the God that is hidden under the appearances of bread and wine, and the God that is hidden under the appearance of rags and torn clothing and poverty. You might struggle to practice your faith. You might be looking to grow deeper in your faith and in your relationship with God. Tonight, what I ask you to do and invite you to do, invite all of us to keep doing as a community, to call each other higher, to help each other in this way, is getting to know God more deeply. When we know God, who God really is, and not the lies and the distortions about God that we were told by the devil and other places, when we get to know God, the practice of our faith becomes something that is easy and something that becomes second nature. We give such great thanks tonight for this God who comes to know us and offers himself as a child. We pray that we may trust him and seek to get to know him so that we can seek to get to love him more fully this day and always.